Recording in progress.
Is that Dan Egan on an iPhone?
Hi, everybody. How you doing?
Hey, Dan. How are you?
Good.
Excellent.
Hey, Seth, while we're waiting, this is John. Is Ski History going to publish that article I did about ski jumping tournaments on Mount Rainier?
Yes, John, we'll run that. I can't tell you exactly when. We're just now putting together the editorial schedule for 2025.
Okay.
But yeah, thanks for sending it in for sure.
Well, 60 more seconds, and I don't know whether anybody is in contact directly with Gwendolyn. I just sent her an email reminding her, and we did have a call last night, so I assume that she will be joining us.
So, Charlie, did you get my email about an hour and a half ago?
Who's that speaking?
Tony Crocker.
I did not. Can you send me something in the chat?
I don't know. I'm actually having a little trouble with this laptop. It's lost the mouse feature somehow. But I mean, there was a one-page document and a spreadsheet with a lot of pages in it.
Hello, Tony. By the way, this is Jay Flemma. I know I owe you a return phone call, but I have been thinking about you, and I'll be in touch shortly. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Well, I'm going to suggest we get started. I will do some introductions. And when Wendolyn joins us, Wendolyn rather, which will hopefully be very shortly, we can go through that. So Seth and Chris are here. So let me introduce first Seth. I think most of you know him. He's one of the nation's most well-known figures in the worlds of both snow sports journalism and climatology. Though he recently claims to have retired from teaching skiing at Snowmass in Aspen. He remains president of the International Skiing History Association and editor of Skiing History magazine, which, as you guys know, has long been one of the most respected snow sports publications in the world under his leadership and that of John Fry before him. Seth's keen interest in climate change, energy policy, and snow science led him to spend 7 years in leadership at the American Solar Energy Society. And he was recently honored by his well-deserved induction into the Colorado Snow Sports Hall of Fame. So thank you, Seth, for joining us and stepping into the panel. Chris
pleasure.
Gloninger is an Emmy-winning meteorologist and among certainly the most well-respected and educationally minded meteorologists in the country. He courageously has advocated for climate literacy as part of every American's understanding of the environment. Originally from Sag Harbor, as some of you might have heard us discussing before, which is a town steeped in climate history dating to the massive 1938 New England hurricane, Chris immediately developed an interest in weather and climate. He received his bachelor's in meteorology from Plymouth, completing internships at the National Weather Service and at WABC in New York, the local TV station, and becoming an avid climber on the not so gentle slopes of Mount Washington, which I assume includes Tuckerman. Chris received his certified broadcasting meteorological accreditation from the American Meteorological Society a decade ago, launching a career that's placed him in the center of the climate debate ever since. His professional experiences will be of enormous interest to all of us, especially in light of the recent weather events, the coverage of which have seen a clash between the scientific and political worlds in ways we've not seen before. Most of you guys know me, Charlie Sanders, an attorney trained at NYU, where I still teach music law and history in the graduate arts department. I'm also president of the North American Snow Sports Journalists Association, your host for this evening, vice chair of the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame, and like Wendolyn and Seth and Aisha board member. My journalistic credits include the history of the U.S. 10th Mountain Division, entitled Boys of Winter, the history of snow sports at Dartmouth College, entitled Passion for Skiing, and the recent article, Skiing the Seven Continents in a Warming World. So before turning the program over to Chris, let me give you a very brief intro containing information that I provided to you earlier. On July 21st of this year, the Earth experienced its highest average temperature since such measurements began. Being recorded, that inauspicious record was broken the following day, with European climate scientists of the EU's Copernicus labs asserting that Monday, July 22nd may have been the world's hottest day of the past 100 millennia, based upon ice core samples that have yielded 100,000 years of temperature-related data. According to the U.S. National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, the 10 warmest years since record keeping began in 1850 have occurred in the past decade. Nearly all of the world's climate scientists conclude that this phenomenon is in significant part a result of human-induced climate shift. Universities of Innsbruck and Waterloo researchers Daniel Scott and Robert Steiger have likewise determined that the average snow sports season in the Northern Hemisphere has decreased by 5 to 7 days in the past 20 years. At current rates, that means that by 2050, the hemisphere's snow season could be well over a month shorter than it was in the year 2000, commencing in January and ending in March. Their study also recently determined that the US and Canadian snow sports industries have likely already lost $5 billion in the last 2 decades due to climate change. New NOAA reports confirm even greater cause for concern. The problem of rising temperatures due to human activity actually appears to be accelerating, not decreasing. Quote, after seeing the 2023 climate analysis, said NOAA chief scientist, Dr. Sarah Kapnick, I have to pause and say the findings are astounding. Not only was 2023 the warmest year in NOAA's 174-year climate record, it was the warmest by far. A new UN report issued this week backs up those findings. So do recent storm events in the Gulf of Mexico and the southeastern United States. We're not here today to debate human-accelerated climate change. That ship sailed decades ago. Rather, our goal is to bring together those passionate about snow and snow sports with those passionate about the weather and climate, who also happen to have daily access to broadcast media, in the hopes of beginning a dialogue about symbiotic collaboration in the future in terms of educating the public. To quote the late Kurt Vonnegut, we are in line to become the first species in the universe ever to go extinct based on the fact that saving ourselves is not costly. With that introduction, Chris, we would love to hear about what you're doing, your experiences as a meteorologist, and your thoughts in general about what we might be able to do together as two industries with deep concern about protecting our winters.
Awesome, Charlie. I appreciate that. And it's great seeing so many fellow winter weather enthusiasts all in one Zoom call. Yeah, so for me, it was Hurricane Bob back in 1991 that sparked my interest in weather. And for me, it wasn't necessarily an immediate jump into the world of climate science. The meteorology degree is technically a degree in atmospheric and climate science. So we're kind of positioned with both, but it really wasn't until Hurricane Sandy that I started to really begin to cover climate change. And then certainly after Hurricane Harvey in Houston, when I was down covering the storm and 50 inches of rain fell. And that was the time when I went to station management at the time and said, hey, we should be doing a lot more about climate change. And there was some hesitation and concern that if we do a weekly series, there has to be enough content for us to be able to sustain that series. So an executive producer and I went to town creating this storyboard, and then soon found it was overwhelming the amount of content there was. And we successfully launched the country's first weekly series on the issue. Everything from adaptation to mitigation to the impacts on the ski industry across parts of New England, to the economy, green jobs, everything. And it was kind of an enjoyable stretch. Then I went to a station in Iowa. They recruited me, a little bit of a backwards move, you know, the TV industry, but it was a job to be chief, and they wanted somebody to talk about how climate change was affecting agriculture. And my hometown, Charlie mentioned, I come from Sag Harbor, had a thriving fishing industry that essentially was decimated by climate change. Warming ocean waters just destroyed the significant industry that it was across Montauk and Shinnecock, shifted up into parts of Massachusetts. You had fishing fleets out of New Bedford and Gloucester, and even there, it's just a small just leftover of what it was. And then now to the Canadian Maritimes, we see some of that, the lobster industry, and now across up towards Iceland, for example. So I kind of came with this air of caution, and I only presented data, science, and facts. I never put on my activist hat. While I am a pretty big climate activist, I never, crossed that line, since even though I'm a meteorologist, it is a job in journalism. And then if you're not aware of my story, I received a series of harassing emails that reached a peak when I got a death threat from an individual who didn't like what I was doing. Police tracked him down after sending a subpoena to Google, and essentially arrested him, and he paid a whopping $150 fine for doing it. What was unfortunate in all of this was that station management said to me that they didn't want me to do it anymore. So why they recruited me to cover climate change, but they were fearful that they were going to start hemorrhaging viewership, and that simply wasn't the case. So between the two things, between not feeling safe after the death threat and having no station support at all, we just decided it was best to move on. So I'm back on Cape Cod. I'm a climate scientist for an environmental and coastal engineering company that stemmed off of Woods Hole Oceanographic. Two of their scientists started this consulting group, which has been a fascinating year of learning, but it's also using my communications background to help engineers explain what they're doing so the public understands. So we work with a lot of municipalities on helping them become resilient in the face of climate change. A lot of the same skills, but I'm able to dive into some more of the science. But yeah, I'm excited about this conversation tonight. You know, while part of me is heartbroken that I left a 20-year career and a dream since I was in second grade, I've found what I'm doing now to be fulfilling, and I think obviously very important.
So before you tell us a little bit more about your organization, which I would love to hear, what was your reaction to your colleagues receiving the kinds of similar threats over the past couple of weeks in covering the storm in Florida and the Southeast?
I mean, I wasn't shocked, and I don't know if any of you, I mean, since you are journalists, are familiar with Climate Matters. They're a fantastic organization, and hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that later. But they're a good resource when it comes to data, and they have a whole suite of products that have to do with the winter sports industry and how climate change is affecting those sports and the economy around it. But I think that they were thinking I was an anomaly, whereas I really knew there was more going on, and there was more hatred. And certainly after 2016, that's when things kind of took a turn where people felt entitled to unleash this hate. So I was actually just doing an interview on NPR this afternoon, or this morning rather, and I found two of those threats, which people that I'm connected with. One in Wisconsin, which and I actually ended up at the station where I found my wife and met my wife. So we have a pretty tight bond. And he got a voicemail from somebody that said, if you don't start telling the truth, you're going to hang by a noose. A colleague in Michigan got a phone call during the Milton Helene, like 2-week period, that said, stop the breathing of those that made them, which is kind of ironic, right? I mean, we are controlling the weather in that we're burning fossil fuels, creating emissions, creating this extreme weather. But what's funny is, you know, I've kind of had this profession, which has been the butt of so many jokes. We have the one job where we could be wrong 50% of the time and still get paid. God, if we were really doing that, would we really, you know, if we could control the weather, would we ever be wrong? But for these conspiracy theorists, it really is shocking that they believe that. They believe that we can create a hurricane and steer it into a red state or a battleground state, but yet the concept that humans are causing climate change is total hogwash. But here we are in 2024, and that's the conversation.
Yeah, you know, I think I speak for everyone on this call and everyone involved in this area of how proud of you that we are to have stood up and made your story basically front page news, so that folks out there in this election year know what's going on and understand what the stakes are. But you've got guts of steel, and we admire you for it. So thank you for that on behalf of everyone.
Appreciate that.
Wendolyn has joined us. Wendolyn rather has joined us. Wendolyn, let me quickly, before we get Seth involved in this, give your background, or if you'd prefer to do that yourself, which do you prefer?
You're welcome to do so, Charlie.
Okay. Let me just quickly call that up on the screen. Attorney Wendolyn Holland received her JD, her Juris Doctorate and LLM from Georgetown, her MBA from Kellogg, and her BA in History and Environmental Studies from in Connecticut, what is that school? Yale. An award-winning ski journalist, She's most famously the author of the celebrated book Sun Valley, An Extraordinary History, and she now hails from Ketchum and the Sun Valley, Idaho area. From 2008 through 2011, Wendolyn served as a senior advisor for communication, for commercialization in the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energies. Her current consulting work with clients in the private sector focuses on clean energy technologies, resource sustainability, and Native American economic development and sovereignty. She likewise serves as the senior advisor for policy and tax at the Alliance for Tribal Clean Energy, and is a board member of the International Skiing History Association, as I mentioned before, along with Seth and myself. So Wendolyn, you've worked in government and outside of government. Can you give us your experiences, kind of continuing the story and the narrative that Chris was embarking on to get us started?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Charlie. I'm glad Chris has gotten us started here. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Wendolyn, and I'm in the clean energy industry. And I got in the clean energy industry because I love skiing. And I saw the lifestyle potentially threatened and going away, not just in some far distant century, but in my lifetime. And it was really time to do something about it. And so I work directly in this field in the realm of finance, technology, government regulations, helping folks get their clean energy technologies to market, helping get projects built. And there's a lot of opposition in this space, right? And we've got a pretty big election coming up. There's some folks who are still kind of denying what's going on. And I will say that even members of my own family are denying this stuff is going on, even while our cousins, as Chris was talking about a moment ago, we're directly the victims of the Milton and Helene 1-2 punch that we had recently in the Southeast. And to deny that this stuff is happening really is to fly in the face of science and the word wrangling that's going on right now between the difference between weather and climate is confusing. And so I feel like it's incumbent upon those of us who do understand science, who do quote unquote believe in science, as though it were some sort of spiritual calling or something, but it's not. That we really learn how to deliver the facts in a way that the opposition is willing to come to terms with, and delivering facts in a way that people are willing to digest and address, and finding ways to educate the public in a way that is not confrontational, it's not biased, but is really very clear in its presentation. And it's hard to do that, of course, when there is so much around us that is actually emotional and cataclysmic and catastrophic. But that notion of maintaining the unbiased view, I think, is really important, because if we do deliver the information with bias, then the whole message gets dismissed. So how can we do our jobs in a way that is more easily digestible by those deniers? I'm not sure if that's where you wanted me to hit on, Charlie. I'm happy to take it any further if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the most obvious question of all is, when we balance the dangers of the future that will be visited upon our descendants and probably our grandchildren or even our children, against the economic concerns of the population right now, is it, in your opinion, even possible to achieve critical mass in terms of the public in the US and around the world demanding that government do something, in spite of the $7 trillion that has been invested in the oil industry in the past few years by private equity funds?
Absolutely. I think there is cause for hope. And it's when we align the market forces with the environmental forces and don't see them at odds with one another. You know, we're still kind of riding the wave, if you will, of this massive federal investment in clean energy technologies in the Biden administration's entire Invest in America portfolio, the compendium of CHIPS and ARP and the IIJA and the IRA, all of those, you know, the alphabet soup of the many, many billions of dollars being thrown into this industry. And my wish, if I had one wish for this, it would be that the mainstream investors see this as an investment opportunity and that they don't see the continued investment in dying technologies as continued opportunities. Those are the ones to hedge against. We're just not seeing those returns in that field anymore. And I was on a call earlier today where someone was saying something about, well, you know, what if, you know, a new administration comes in and we start to see subsidies again for oil and gas? Well, folks, we already have those. There's hundreds and hundreds of subsidies that exist and have continued to exist for decades for the fossil fuel industry. And the additional funding that the clean and green technologies that are so active right now, these are really just a drop in the bucket. We see this inherent in the tax code. That's one of the reasons why I've been drawn so deeply to my work in corporate taxes in the clean energy space, is the alignment of the tax code with clean energy goals. For so long, we didn't really have an energy policy in the United States. We had the economic manifestations of our tax policies. And I think we're starting to see some good work in that area. We've got some really exciting tax credits going on in the Inflation Reduction Act. And it's going to take us a decade or so until we see the results of those. But, you know, please start to pay attention to what's going on in the tax code and the manifestation of this stuff. It's sort of, it's some people think it's harder and less interesting, but the tax code is, frankly, it's where it's all at.
Well, it's very refreshing to hear some optimism. I mean, certainly the global geopolitical issues that are entangled in this in terms of the developing world, of which China believes it's part, you know, make this so difficult, I think, on a international negotiation and treaty from that standpoint. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad to hear that you see a potential light at the end of a tunnel. Seth, you are certainly one of the most experienced people in terms of analyzing the ski and snowboard and winter sports industry and how it has over the decades reacted to global warming, whether people believe that it was human-induced or not. Where do you think we are on the timeline in terms of seeing the industry go one way or the other on taking a public stand on the issue?
Interesting question. You know, when I first started writing about this stuff 30 or 40 years ago, most people in the ski business were willing to entertain the notion that global warming was real and that it was eventually going to affect us maybe 100 years out. The thinking has changed a lot since then. They are cognizant of the fact that the snowmaking season has shrunk. There are resorts particularly in Europe that have closed permanently for specifically because they don't see a climate future for themselves. They're no longer getting enough snow to be economically viable. Some of that has happened in the US, but the people involved don't tend to attribute it to climate change, probably for political reasons. I believe that ski area ownership in general is aware that the industry is life limited and that they need exit strategies. And I believe that some of that thinking affects their pricing structures and business practices. I think, like the fossil fuel industry, a lot of large companies involved in the in skiing have determined that the smart thing to do is to maximize their profits while they still have a product to sell. It's kind of a dim way, a cynical way to look at what's going on now, but that's how Wall Street works, and Wall Street is involved in the management of so many skiing related companies now, that I can't help thinking that I'm not party to what goes on in the boardrooms, but that makes sense to me. One thing I will say is that climate plays a role in all the outside influences that affect our business and every business. For instance, it's becoming increasingly difficult to get homeowners insurance, not only along shorelines, but in areas that are prone to flooding or wildfires, and that helps exacerbate the housing shortage that we have in this country, and particularly in ski towns. So it directly affects the experience of people who work in the business, and who can't afford to live in ski towns anymore. So there are a lot of social ills that we're already experiencing, that have been and will continue to be affected by climate change. Global warming at this point, we're about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit into the progress of the disease. And at this point, it's probably not reversible. The best we can hope for is that social policy, green energy adoption, reduction of carbon footprints around the world can slow the process and maybe extend our sport for another generation or two. It's not going to be reversible.
Yeah, I don't know whether I can ascribe cynicism to what you're saying. I think that the financial interests of those who run the ski conglomerates and the kind of consolidation that's taking place, and the realpolitik of the fact that these folks still give donations politically to candidates who are climate deniers, as well as those fighting, to protect the environment, makes what you're saying, not only plausible, but certainly instructive. Do you see, as Wendolyn just mentioned, a way to mobilize our community of winter sports lovers in a way that could assist in extending the life of this sector of winter sports over the next several decades?
That's an interesting question, and I don't really have an answer for it. In general, it's historically, it's been difficult to organize skiers politically. They'll join a club to have a good time. They'll join a club to get breaks on travel. They'll join a club to support their local community of young racers. But if you look at the history of skiers have always been a cosmopolitan crowd. The sport was founded in North America by Scandinavian immigrants who were mostly dirt farmers and miners. And they were generally liberal-minded people. They joined unions. They voted populist. During World War II, during the late 30s and during World War II, skiing became a function of the anti-fascist movement by virtue of the arrival here of refugees from the Nazis and the influence of the 10th Mountain Division. So for most, and a lot of the people who founded ski areas did so because they loved the mountains and they loved the environment. And it was ironic that they were cast by the Sierra Club later as anti-environmentalists, which may have been an accurate way to describe the real estate speculators who flocked to ski towns in the wake of lift development, but probably was unfair to the ski resort developers themselves. So in there was a sense within the business or within the culture that most of us tended center left on a lot of the issues at play. I don't know that that's still the case, particularly given the overwhelming influence of large corporations, hedge funds, and it's become such a capitalist culture that you really have to think that most of their decisions and political support is based on short-term financial considerations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and whether or not David Brower, out of the 10th Mountain and head of a Sierra Club, would change his tune at this point, were he still alive, is something to ponder. Jumping back to Chris, so we have Wendolyn's belief that something can be done on the government level, including through a tax structure. And we have Seth's point of view, which I think is spot on, that the skiing, snowboarding, and winter sports industry is unlikely itself to be a leader in public education. Since meteorologists do have a platform in media, is there any chance that establishing some bonds between the actual sports people who are trying to preserve this winter sports and the meteorologists who, as far as I can tell, in the main want to educate the public that this is a severe danger? Where do we go from here in terms of starting that ball rolling?
I mean, I think it's important to talk to local meteorologists and get trends. And we just had a conference, Southern New England Weather Conference, and now we're looking at December, for example, as a new fall month, which is quite remarkable. In fact, in Southern New England, climatologically, you can now mow your lawn into the first half of December, which is a pretty monumental change. But I think tying these stories together and showing how the season is changing, the first freeze being pushed back to a certain date, those are all things that we can kind of lace into coverage and stories without, beating it over somebody's head. That I think is critical in that messaging, is taking the data, the facts, the science, and weaving it into the stories. When I was in Boston, I had a really good friend who is a backcountry skier who's traveled all over the world to go backcountry skiing. And I did a story with him to talk about glacial retreat when he skied the glaciers, to see in his time in doing this how big of a difference there is. And it was such an impactful story because he could tell it, in his own descriptions, his own words, which I think was helpful for the audience. What I've found, though, is the ski industry just tries to be, and we had this call in our pre-call last night, we had this talk, they're so Pollyanna about the situation, like, oh, well, the technology's keeping up with it. And I did a story, I freelance occasionally for the Boston Globe, and we did something, it may have been Wachusett, where they have some AI technology where they can say, well, if you move the snow from this part of the mountain to the other, it'll keep the snowpack going. I mean, that's fine, but keep in mind, I mean, that really is just putting a Band-Aid on a hemorrhaging wound. And I really would encourage and find creative ways to get them to admit that, yeah, climate change truly is an uphill battle for them. And as Seth mentioned, maybe we get another generation out of it, but this isn't long term. The changes, we've waited too long to change in many ways. And again, another one of Seth's point is that he brought up is the fact that a lot of this change is baked in. There's no going back. Even with carbon sequestration, even with these wild ideas of solar geoengineering, we've reached a point where there's warming baked in that we can't go back. And we're at those thresholds where the northern latitudes and higher elevations are seeing a massive hit when it comes to snow.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the people on this phone call have seen it firsthand. There's no question about that. I mean, should we be shifting our focus to basically total collapse being a possibility if the polar regions put all of that ice into the water? And should we be angry, as I just heard the weather forecast given in a very cheerful tone, that, oh, it's going to be great, we have 80-degree temperatures on October 31st. This is terrific for the kids trick-or-treating. I'm not sure in 50 years whether those kids will look back on that as a fond memory of our generation's reaction to what's going on. I mean, should we be angry about this?
Yeah, and I mean, I would put pressure on meteorologists to not be celebrating these records. I was watching, not by choice, it was just on Fox Weather, and they were, saying, oh, this dry stretch too, it's been so much sunshine. Like, give me a break. Like, I mean, that is really, I said this also last night on the call. Meteorologists have a degree in atmospheric and climate science, and I have come and gone head to head with people in my profession where they talk about a meteor shower, they can talk about a volcanic eruption, they feel comfortable enough to talk about the northern lights, but yet they don't want to rock the boat when it comes to climate change. Well, our background, our academic background, is more connected to that than it is any of those astronomical events. And I think that really is scientific and meteorological malpractice when you don't, and when you just give that, oh, this is great, more sunshine, more warm weather. And it's more than just the lack of snow. I mean, look what happens. I mean, look at the deforestation that happened with Hurricane Milton across the upstate of North Carolina. This is devastating to the ski resorts. When you have storms like Hurricane Irene too, that rip through and cause mudslides and damage a whole season, where it puts them out of commission. So yes, they need to change the tune, and they can't be as happy about these sunny, warm days when it's so unnatural.
Wendolyn, speaking of good propaganda, you spend a lot of time, as I do, working with Native communities and getting their viewpoints on the natural world. And certainly we can probably, all of us, remember the maybe the best PSA of all time was Iron Eyes Cody crying at watching somebody throwing a garbage out the window onto the highway, and that tear rolling down his face. How is the Native community plugged into what's going on? And is there a way to take advantage of the high moral plane on which they are able to speak from?
Absolutely. Charlie, that's a really good question. I appreciate the way you posed that. There is, in fact, and that is tapping into and learning from them. So often in the clean energy industry, and frankly, in any industry, healthcare, what have you, practitioners go onto a tribal reservation and think about how we're going to teach them and the way you phrased it turns the tables and would posit the natives themselves as the keepers of the knowledge of, as we say, traditional ecological knowledge or indigenous ecological knowledge. This is the sort of knowledge that is, not too surprisingly, passed down by oral tradition, generation over generation, and these oral traditions are much, much older than our written history, than any of us have written about, that's for sure. And so there is absolutely a way, and we're starting to see this being recognized. There's a new initiative came out of the White House maybe 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, through the Office of Management and Budget, the Department of Commerce, and one other agency, to really look at how traditional ecological knowledge can be infused throughout the fields of climate science that are happening in the different agencies. So we're beginning to see this being recognized, and that's just one point along this very gradual shift that's been going on in our country, coming out of the different phases that we've seen in our nation's history over the last 250 years, where the earlier periods of how we regarded tribes were more about extermination, relocation, the old call to action from just 100 years ago, kill the Indian, save the man. And now we're seeing how these tribes are actually much better, in fact, at stewarding the natural resources around them than we non-natives are. And I think the key to that is something that I have only observed. It's not part of who I am, certainly as a European descendant myself. And that is living in harmony with nature in a way that it goes beyond looking to natural resources as resources, but instead as a spiritual responsibility, as a oneness. So yes, we are starting to see this work coming to light, and in a pretty exciting way. Most sort of activity in this space is coming through the U.S. Department of Agriculture as well as Interior, with the co-management of some of the federal lands, BLM, National Park Service, those types of places. So yes, indeed, those are coming to light, even while some of the racist tendencies within our federal bureaucracy do persist. And a lot of the work that I'm focused on right now is helping the federal agencies understand their trust responsibility, as well as understand that tribes are now kind of in the driver's seat, if you will, doing their own work to develop the renewable energy projects, and not merely just in reaction to development that may have been happening to them in the past. And the reason I chose to focus on tribes in my work with clean energy is because I firmly believe that once we fix the human environmental relationship with those who are truly at the base of the economic development pyramid, who are truly the most disadvantaged, who 500 years ago were very wealthy societies, once we fix it for them, everyone else further up the food chain will be much better off. So I feel like if we focused on those who are the worst off, the rest of us might be able to figure it out.
Thank you for that very comprehensive and insightful answer. Yves Junot is on the call, and I know that up in Quebec, he's been working on a project that ties, I think, very closely to what we've been discussing. Yves, you want to talk about that per se?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I feel like with the election coming and the climate change discussion, you guys should think about moving up to Canada, right?
Believe me, we have.
We're going to stand and fight, though.
I just wanted to share with you that, this is a concern that we have in Canada. My colleague Paul is here from the Canadian Ski Council, a concern about understanding climate change, the impact it has on the ski industry. And I'm very happy and proud to report that we just, this Friday, this is in French, so I'm not sure if you are have enough French to understand, but this Friday we will unveil a report on the Uranus Consortium. Uranus is a bit like NOAA in the United States, and they've been studying for the past 2 years the impact of climate change on the Quebec ski industry. It is analyzing the impact on 4 different axes: on global warming, on rain precipitation in the winter, on snow coverage, and the 4th one is on the freeze and warming temperature within 1 day. The actual findings are definitely telling us some good information. One is that we will continue to have winter and we will continue to have skiing, but there are some areas of concern that we need to pay attention to. And the idea now is to take that data and understanding it and how we can move forward in the future to make sure that each ski area is able to use the tool that we developed. It's a mountain-specific diagnosis, and the ASSQ will accompany each ski area in that domain to make sure that they use the tool. They are able to also understand the data that really fits their particular profile. So for us, there are 30 ski areas that have participated in that study. And I feel that this is something that the rest of North America should definitely pay attention to. I think it's leading work. We've also been working with Natalie Knowles out of the University of Waterloo. There's been some really good work done in Canada and also the States. But I wanted to show and share with you that we are paying attention to that issue and we are making sure that we're able to adapt. The research has been done to focus on 2 different scenarios. One is to predict how climate change will impact the ski business in Quebec from now till 2050. And we have also been able to make forecasts until 2070. So, all of those matters really are strategic for the future of our industry. And now that we have that data, we will produce a resiliency plan to make sure that we are able to adapt and continue to offer great skiing experiences to our guests. So I hope it doesn't work. I don't want to sound like corporate messaging. I just want to make sure that there is some data available, that it's data that anyone can pay attention to and definitely use in the future.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we very much look forward to seeing that, and we'll be happy to help you distribute that around as much as you'd like. It sounds like a very important report.
Yes, please share the link to that in the chat if you wouldn't mind.
I will. The report is going to be unveiled publicly on Friday, but you will be able to get a preview of it with the link I'm going to post in the moment.
Thank you.
Thanks. There's a discussion going on between David and Peggy in the chat that is very interesting. Peggy, you're writing an article in regard to ski racing and its effect on the World Cup circuit of climate change.
Yes, sorry, I had to find my mute. Yes, the working title is Can Ski Racing Exist in a Warming World? We've got Solden that just happened on the Rettenbach Glacier last weekend, and they got both races off. I don't know the condition of the glacier, but I know the glaciers in Europe are shrinking. And I know FIS just came out with a report a month ago about the sustainability of the World Cup. I have not read it yet. I've been too busy, but it's on my plate to read in the next couple of weeks. But I just wanted to get some comments here from people. And Chris shared his email, and I'm emailing him right after the call.
Okay, we'll look for that. Dan, what's your take on all of this in terms of your ability to influence as an influencer in the ski world?
You're asking me, Charlie?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a very, you know, important conversation. And, you know, I agree with Eves. You know, I think that the ski areas are vested in figuring something out, whether it's Four Seasons or as recreational centers. And that I'm interested to read what his research and what he's got there. And you know, I think, you know, we need to find a balance between alarming people, and the core niche of our industry, which is aspirational. And I think that we have a very resilient industry. And I think the conversation needs to incorporate that. You know, we lost ski areas in the 70s when ski areas didn't input snowmaking. Some skiers went by the wayside. So ski areas that don't adapt to the market conditions will fall away, whether that means they will be skiing or no skiing or other activities. People will always flock to the mountains to find a lifestyle. And I think our lifestyle is embedded in these mountains and these infrastructure. I'm fascinated by you know, what's going on up at the Matterhorn, you know, and all that they're doing there, because they're invested in infrastructure to see the last highest glacier in Europe. You know, and I think there's a lot of infrastructure being built around getting to altitude and either seeing and witnessing what's happening before our eyes for that big impact. But I think Zermatt's not investing because they think people aren't going to keep coming. They're investing because people will come. They will either recreate or witness what is happening. It's still going to be beautiful things and beautiful places, beautiful things that and activities that happen in the mountains. And I think we shouldn't forget about that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the Western Alps with higher altitude,
Yeah.
that is true. The Eastern Alps, it's a much more dire situation in central Austria anyway. Having seen that the last few years. Seth, did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to point out that a lot of the second home investment in ski resorts is already being driven by the idea that ski resorts are climate havens. If you live and work in Florida or Texas or Arizona, you may not want to spend the summer there. You want to spend the summer at your second home in the high mountains. So there will be thriving economies in those areas that just may not include skiing in the long run.
Yeah. Dave Schisler had a couple of interesting points in the chat as well.
Well, I was responding to Peggy's question about World Cup and saying that basically, you know, the short-term solution will be higher up the mountain, but you probably won't have the Hanukkah ending in town anymore. People are going to have to hoop up there. And you know, long-term, who knows? I mean, I understand what Dan is saying too. The mountains will always be an attraction for Four Seasons, but I hear Seth loud and clear. And frankly, I said also I have no objection to what Seth has been saying, but that's pretty dire prediction for where we might be in a very short time, you know, several decades. And that's a little scary.
Mary?
First, the last, the death, the birth.
No, not Mary. I thought you might want to weigh in. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, I started skiing in the 50s and so much has changed. But, you know, I think you've got to balance the the economic output with what we're getting from interesting.
Yeah, can whoever's mic is open, mute. I think it might be Dino.
Anyway, you know, pouring more and more money into snowmaking and technology and you know, ways to get people up on glaciers and how many people are going to really, I mean, I'm kind of with Seth on the dire end of it. I mean, that's what the science is telling us. It's not like the snow is melting because it just feels like it. It's because the snow is melting because we have caused it. And I believe that the economic factors drive a lot of the stuff that is causing climate change. And, you know, that's, I'm old, I don't care, but I have grandchildren who love to ski, and I just don't see them being able long-term to, well, first of all, to afford it. And second of all, to have the conditions that are right for them to easily get to a ski resort and anyway, that's just my 2 cents. Thanks.
Chris, just informationally, you mentioned that certain parts of the world, especially you know, in the extremes, are warming much faster than the rest. We're seeing that in Alaska. We're seeing it in the Himalayas.
Well, I sure didn't understand that stupid movie.
Is altitude going to save us for a couple of generations?
I mean, unfortunately, it's similar to latitude, altitude and latitude. Farther north you go, farther up you go. I mean, you can kind of delay the change, but unfortunately, and I think the biggest change, I guess, in the near term is the front end of the season is really difficult to guarantee a good dump of snow early on, which was almost a lock, especially in parts of like New England. And we turn to the Siberian snow cover, which is a good indication of how the winter looks, and there's less and less and less snow there. And that's one of the key areas that I think we really need to watch closely is how Siberia is doing with snow in October. That's one of the things that we look for. But I think we'll buy time for a while, but I think it's the front end of the season that we have to be most concerned about. It's a very slow start.
Tony, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I do. I'm going to be the skunk in the room here because I've been collecting snowfall data going back to the 70s. And when this issue was first brought to my attention in the late 2000s, I looked at that data, at least in the North American ski areas, of which I have like well over 80 data sets, and found absolutely no trend in snowfall. You know, at like 90% of these places. And for many of them, that's still true. In terms of the basic physics of climatology, a 1 degree centigrade rise in temperature raises the snow line 500 feet. You know, we've seen that 1 degree raise in temperature over the past 50 years. And, you know, I guess as a skier, I live in a very privileged area, having, you know, Mammoth as my most frequently skied mountain, where, you know, I was still skiing there in August in 17 and 23. You know, the Sierra has a problem with climate volatility and some early season droughts, but in that department, 1977 is still the worst one of those. And that's actually true for the entire Western United States. You know, now with respect to New England, there's always been a big rain problem in the particularly in the shoulder season. So what Chris said about the front end of the season in New England, I certainly agree with that 100%. it's always rained a lot in November, and the 500 feet or the latitude, it's definitely an impact. But in the Rocky Mountains, you really cannot find data at the level of ski areas. When people talk about hydrology sites on the 1st of April having less snowpack, they are generally places that are lower than where the ski areas are that melt out earlier. In major Western resorts, I don't think you can point at hardly anybody that opens later or closes earlier than they did 40 years ago. And in the case of the openings, it may be some of them are probably earlier now because they had snowmaking when they didn't before.
Tony, is there any way to measure freeze thaw cycle and what that's doing to the snowpack in terms of stability? Even if the number of inches or centimeters remains stable, the snowpack is not the same as it used to be. Is there a way to measure that?
Well, in terms of snow stability, the issue is mainly the coastal versus intermountain versus continental snowpacks. And that is the reason that A Basin, after an accident in 2005, has to terminate skiing on their steep terrain after they have 72 hours of above freezing temperatures. And that generally, the average time that happens is about 2 weeks into May. And, might that date continue to back up? Yes, it might. But in our coastal pack at Mammoth, I was still skiing, 35 and 40 degree runs there in August.
Seth?
Yes.
Seth,
That's
like
not
to
really an issue
I'd
in
like
certain
to
places.
put some of Tony's remarks in context. I understand there's a big difference between maritime and continental snowpacks. When I lived in Truckee, I was able to make a late May, early June ski tour every year along the Pacific Crest without worrying too much about avalanche. Here in Colorado, I can't do that. Once you leave the ski area, if you dig a snow pit anywhere, there's a foot or more of hoarfrost at the base. So the snowpack is certainly unstable here. As the atmosphere warms, it's capable of absorbing and cycling more precipitation. More of that comes down as rain at most elevations, but it still comes down as snow at higher elevations. It's inarguable, however, that glaciers are shrinking and shrinking at an accelerating pace, and that glacier-based ski resorts are closing.
That's I'm made in Europe. That's where most of this is, and that's because their summers are hotter. Historically in the Alps, it actually still snowed in the summer above 10,000 feet, and so you kind of have a double impact of, not only is it just hotter and melting snow factor, but that's an environment where you've had snow turning to rain.
But the glaciers are melting around the world, not just in Europe. They're melting in the Himalaya. They're melting in South America. And this raises the issue that skiing may be the canary in the coal mine, but a canary is a very, very, very small beast. And by the time global warming is already affecting the world's economy in some subtle and not so subtle ways, but when the last of the glaciers is melting, has melted, and there's no more snow storage in the high mountains, vast areas of the globe are no longer going to have irrigation water for their crops. It's 150 years from now, it's going to be ugly. And skiing is going to be the least of anybody's worries.
Yeah, I mean, again, so many of the people on this call have seen this up close and personal. The Fox Glacier in New Zealand, I've seen it in Antarctica. So yeah, I mean, being the canary in the coal mine is a tough job. I see it in other industries, including my own, which is music. It's usually the first to suffer from technology. And in this case, the ski industry is one of the first to suffer as a result of warming. But, it strikes me that there's so much more to discuss about this. And that certainly we have a limited time this evening to do so. But I'm wondering how you all feel about continuing this discussion on a regular basis. And Chris, I mean, do you think that the meteorological groups would welcome participation of a group like ours to talk about these things and get reaction?
I do, absolutely. And I'm happy to make those contacts and connections to get that ball rolling. So one point though, I do want to make with Tony, if you look at how the atmosphere works, and one of the reasons why climate change is happening is one of the atmospheric laws called Clausius-Clapeyron. And for every degree of warming, the snow elevations are changing, I think you mentioned, but it also means the atmosphere holds 7% more moisture, and that manifests in heavier precipitation rates. And there are many places in the United States which are seeing this temporary increase in seasonal snowfall totals. And Boston's one of those cities that has actually seen an uptick. That's not a good thing, though. And I'm curious, and this is my question back to you, and I think Charlie kind of mentioned this. Have you taken note of the snow quality and the density of it? Has that changed over time?
It's really hard to find anybody that even measures that data. When I started looking this, and I have something that I emailed to Charlie, admittedly an hour and a half ago. I suspect you'd be interested in seeing it. In terms of what I, as an amateur, but one who's been doing it for 35 years, because I felt the issue was rain versus snow, I tried to find, where data was in the areas in the Northeast and the Pacific coast that it would be applicable, and the best you could find is aggregated precipitation totals compared to toast snow totals by months, and the trend is in the direction that you think it is, but it's very gradual.
My theory is that the snow is a lot more dense. Right, the snow liquid ratio, I think, is probably going in a different direction. So I think that's my theory, and I would love to be.
Yeah, the average, but when you measure total water to total snow, what in the place that I'm looking at, I think that the total water is going up because it's raining more. The snow, when it falls, getting denser. I would be kind of surprised if that's true, and one of the reasons is the old Mansfield stake data that stopped being collected in 2017. I looked at and their measurements were a little flawed. I've found out from some meteorologists who live in Vermont, but nonetheless, the water content of snow in Vermont is closer to Utah's than it is to California's. However, out at the other end, you've got a tail where 20% of their precipitation is in the form of rain, and yet their average snow density when they get snow is 7 or 8%, whereas at Mammoth, where you have a Pacific maritime climate, but because it's at 9,000 feet, there's almost no rain, but the average density is 13%. There's not a lot of, that's kind of all the data I have. And, I guess, my conclusion is that as far as skiing and climate change is concerned, what you're looking for is how much snow is being converted to rain and how quickly is that happening, and when is it happening? And you know, the point that you made that I think is loud and clear is that once you get away from the Pacific coast, the front end and the shoulder seasons are where you've got the problems of getting a lot more rain.
Yeah, Tony, I mean, certainly the people who are complaining the loudest, from my perspective, are the folks in Jackson Hole, where there's a much greater percentage of backcountry skiers who are sensitive to changes that maybe others don't notice. And there's a lot of bitching and moaning going on about the very steep increase in danger of avalanche there. So that may be a place that, you know, a data collection might yield some very interesting results.
Yeah, I'm known in the ski community as the bad guy about Jackson Hole because their exposure of the lifts. I'm not the backcountry in the lift served ski area, you know, is a problem, and because of that exposure, they do sometimes have to close the lower faces for wet snow instability in spring. And you know, my personal view is that it's unreliable for advanced booking after President's Weekend. But you know, that dates back to my first visit there in late March of 1986, when there was 110 inches of glue on the ground and I had to leave and go to Salt Lake for the rest of the week. I would never, Jackson is not an area that it would occur to me as being a climate threatened ski area in any way. So what exactly are they seeing in the backcountry that is different from 40 years ago?
I think that exactly what you guys were talking about, the liquid ratio having gone up, the snow is heavier. It does not resemble the kind of powder. You know, again, this is all anecdotal, and the memory plays tricks on all of us in terms of we were always better 10 years ago. You know, hard to say. I don't want to cut off the discussion. Does anyone else have anything that they want to add?
Yeah, I would just add that the mountaineering community in Western Alps was also cognizant that the summer snow is no longer as stable as it used to be. And there are routes to the top of Mont Blanc, for instance, where cornices that used to be stable will now collapse under the weight of a single climber. And there have been a number of accidents attributable to people going in places where it used to be safe and it no longer is. So I'll just add that. It's
well, you know, again, I think there's so much more to discuss. I want to thank all of you for joining us. I think this was a terrific panel, and everyone's input very much appreciated. I think this is exactly the kind of discussion that NASJA hopes to engender in the future. And I promise you, this will not be the last time that we're all together talking about climate. So, Chris, thanks so much. Again, tip of the hat to you for all you've done. The same for Wendolyn and Seth. We really appreciate you know, the kind of research and labor that you put into to keeping things going. And we will be in close touch with you. Anybody who's going to be in Boston for the ski show, we will be having a very interesting ski safety panel that we'll be sponsoring, and we'll look forward to seeing you in person there. And with that, stay safe, everybody.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you,
Will
Charlie.
we be getting a link to this, Charles?
Will there be a link?
Yes, we'll get this up as soon as we can.
All right.
Right.
So.
Take care, everyone.